Hey guys, welcome back. Sometimes I think I get carried away with working on projects for other people, and sometimes I think I need to take some time to reflect that the things that I do, aren't things that I just picked up on my own. I ended up learning what I know from other people, of course, as everyone does. And I thought during this video, I would share a little bit about the people who helped me to be who I am and what I know today. Back when I was probably in my early 20s, I lived in Leavenworth, Kansas, and there was a gentleman named Vince, a shorter guy from Ecuador, worked on my dad's MG Midget. That's how we got to meet him. Well, it turned out that over time, when my dad passed away in 2005, I spent lots and lots of time in Vince's shop. He worked all by himself. He didn't have any other people. It wasn't a really large shop. It was kind of like a one-man show. But working in the shop with him, I learned so many things, so many different things. We went to the salvage yards on the Saturday to go pick up parts. Vince was an older person. He was in his 60s around the time that we were hanging out together, and he had been such good friends with my dad that it just felt natural to have him as a mentor. I learned how to do many things in his shop because over time, Vince had come from Ecuador when he was a teenager. He originally worked at his grandfather's blacksmith shop, where sometimes payment was maybe a chicken or a pig, and then he ended up coming here to the United States into the Kansas City area, where he finished his high school diploma, got a job with a place called Masterson's, which was an automotive shop. Same time he learned English, brought his wife over, who finished her high school degree and went to college and learned English, of course. He is the epitome of the person who came into this country and took advantage of what it is to live here in the United States of America with the opportunities that we have. Well, he worked for Masterson's for about 23 years, and there was a client that he'd worked on many of his vehicles over time, and the person happened to own property, and he owned a little shop, and he told Vince that Vince should go out on his own. And in 1985, Vince opened up Vince's Auto, 3 small bays, an office, and it had a Volkswagen Beetle, a vintage Volkswagen Beetle, sitting on a pole a little bit higher than the roof line of the building. Everybody in town knows the Beetle on the pole. Whether or not they know Vince or have ever been to Vince's shop, they know that Volkswagen Bug sitting up on top of that pole. Well, Vince ended up with kids who got college degrees. They all, of course, were driving really nice cars that Vince bought and fixed up for them. And in the process, I learned from him more than just how to work on a car. I learned, like I learned from my father, I learned moral values, ethics. I think that I benefited greatly, probably more than I understand. Well, Vince is much older now, and he sold the business. So there's no more vintage 12-cylinder Jaguars in that shop now. I think actually the shop has been sold, but there's nobody in it right now, which is kind of sad to drive by in Leavenworth and see the shop just all closed up, but that's what happens when people get older and retire, I guess. The next person that I would like to talk about is, we hear the word, cool, like a person is a really cool person. And I think to myself, if I had to pick the epitome of a car person who is just downright one of the coolest people I've ever met, there's a guy that lives, one of our neighbors, he's in his mid-70s, guy's name's Ronnie, worked, as I mentioned him before, but he worked the head of maintenance for Central College here in Pella, Iowa for about 25 years. And old hot rodder from back in the day. When you go into his shop in the evenings, he's sitting there with a glass of whiskey, and it doesn't matter where he's at, he always has this big cigar, always smoking this big cigar. He's got the mustache and the beard. Looks a lot like the dad from American Chopper. He was down there the last few years building a T-Bucket Roadster, and he'll ride around in that T-Bucket Roadster now with his huge fat Labrador retriever. They'll just drive around town, or he goes to every car show in the area. But if you go in his shop, it looks like something right out of like the early 70s. And he's just a really cool guy to know. He's got a picture of his first 66 blue Pontiac GTO sitting on the wall. And you know, when my friends and I, if we come over to see him, we leave the shop, we all think to ourselves, we're never going to be like that. But we think to ourselves, if we could ever be in our mid 70s and be that cool, that would be awesome. But it's not going to happen. Ronnie is a one of a kind of person, you know. He's got 5 or 6 cars in storage units, and he's working on them all the time. My friend Larry, who's in his 60s, told him, he said, hey Ronnie, man, you know, if you just sold some of these cars and bought yourself something like a Toyota Camry, you wouldn't be doing this all the time. And Ronnie's response, now I'm not saying that this would be everyone's response, but Ronnie's response to that was, the day that I buy a 4-cylinder Toyota Camry, take me out back and shoot me. So I think he's probably going to be old school until the day that he dies. I would say also another person that kind of had an influence on me in a way that he probably didn't understand. I didn't work with him personally, but my mom's neighbor, Rod, older guy too, had a Volkswagen Beetle convertible, and he ended up restoring this Volkswagen Beetle convertible from what it was to, it's beautiful now, bright red convertible top. It runs like nobody's business. And I think that watching him do that, I kind of, when I'd come visit my mom, I would see him working on it, and more it just gave me this, oh, I want to do that too. Like he was a good influence. Like I want to get a car and I want to be able to do that. I ended up buying from him. His brother gave him a '79 Mustang pace car, turbo pace car. Well, I bought it from Rod. That's a long story. So we'll just say Rod knows what I'm talking about when I bought that car, and I ended up in a little bit of hot water from the police the second that I brought it home. We can laugh about it now. Well, he really was the epitome of, you know, that weekend. You know, he worked, you know, a hard job, and then on the weekends he was. Now, the funny thing is, they did take a trip into Minnesota, I believe it was, in the car, and his wife let him know, you know, without a shadow of a doubt, she wasn't going to be driving in that car anymore cross country. Of course, you know, guys, if we build a car, we don't care how rough it is. We don't care what it sounds like. We're going to drive it. We're going to drive it cross country. We're ready to do it. But, you know, most of the people that I know, their wives really aren't as into these, you know, hoopties that we drive all the time. You know, I think that what that does is it shows us that we need to take a moment sometimes, and we need to remember the people who taught us to do these things and show some respect. We didn't learn to do these things on our own. My friend Larry that I talk about, my friend Heath with the Camaro, his dad Larry is in his 60s. Larry has driven a semi in his life for 20 some years. He worked at the manufacturing plant, Vermeer. He can weld, he can do machine work, he can fix electronics. There's really not much that guy can't do. Small engine repair, work on regular automotive engines, transmissions. And I've learned a lot of stuff from Larry about, you know, just day-to-day maintenance. One thing that Larry does have a problem with me though is, for some reason I have a problem when I take apart wheel bearings, the transmission CV axles, I have trouble getting clicked back in. So I always got to go down and knock on Larry's door. And just a little while ago, I was changing out a wheel bearing on one of my cars, and I knock on his door and I put my head down and I look up and he goes, CV axle? I'm like, yeah. He goes, when are you gonna learn? But then he, you know, puts on his shoes and he comes out and he helps me out. He's that kind of guy where he will help you out, but he will give you crap the entire time that he's helping you out. But he's taught me how to do so many things. You know, one thing that my friend Vince always told me was, you can look in a book, you can look on the internet, but the one thing that people today aren't able to do is think for themselves. They aren't able to problem solve. And I'll say that some of these older guys that I've watched or I've had teach me how to do things, they've taught me those lessons. And those lessons are, you know, the book might say it goes from A to B, but the book doesn't tell you. You know, you watch those shows on television and the shows have, you know, build a car in 30 minutes with commercials. That's not how it works. They don't tell you about the broken cotter key in a ball joint that takes you 45 minutes to get out. It doesn't tell you about the tie rod that will not come undone. You know, they don't tell you about those little things. But when I listen to these older people, they give you tips, they give you techniques, and the biggest thing they did for me was teach me how to think for myself and how to use common sense when the book really wasn't something that was working. So I would say to everybody out there, if you have somebody that's teaching you to do something, or somebody that you hang out with, don't just let them fix your car. Watch it, learn from them, do it yourself. Because, you know, I've benefited a lot from that. The people that I feel the saddest for are the ones that sit around and watch somebody fix their car. You need to get into it and with these people and do it yourself. Well, that's it. Thanks for watching.